Hey y'all, my name is Susan Sparks and I'm the senior pastor here at Madison Avenue Baptist Church in New York City. We are a diverse community brought together by faith. We hope that you enjoy our service today. The title of my sermon is The Inclusion Clause of Life. I grew up on a very tiny, quiet, little neighborhood street called Lockhart Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina. For years, I was the only little girl on a street full of boys. Luckily, I could outrun and outclimb most of them, so they would begrudgingly play with me. Except, of course, in the treehouse. Tucked away in the top of an old sycamore in my next-door neighbor's yard was a kind of fort of nailed-together plywood. It was the place that all the kids in the neighborhood, all the boys of the neighborhood loved to play. And to emphasize it was only for boys, they had scribbled the, of course, ubiquitous sign, "No girls allowed," stuck it on the front door. Ironically, the sign was not spelled A-L-L-O-W-E-D. They spelled it A-L-O-U-D, which made me think I could come in if I was quiet. I was wrong. I was never invited in. And I put up with all that all-boys treehouse for a long time, not wanting to rock the boat, hoping that they'd change their minds. And then one morning, I woke up and thought, this is a new day. So I snuck through my neighbor's gate, and I inched up the ladder, and as I was about to clear the last rung, one of the boys spotted me and started shouting, "You can't come up here, you're a girl, read the sign." I was about to respond, "You can't spell," when my next door neighbor's mom came running out of the house and said, "What is the ruckus?" When the boys shouted their angry disapproval, she crossed her arms and gave one of the best comeback lines ever. She said, "Well, boys, I own this tree and the tree house that's in it. So technically, you're trespassing. But I'll let you stay if you take that tacky sign off the door and let Susan in." There was a long silence, then a lot of grumbling, and the sign was finally pulled down. And they did it, not because they loved me or they wanted to. They did it because they had to. They did it because they didn't own the treehouse. 50-something years later, yes, I've coughed it up, nothing has changed. The world is full of tree houses with signs that say "no girls allowed," or "no people of color allowed," or "no LGBT allowed," or "no persons with disability allowed." Why? Because unlike in my neighbor's yard, these modern day tree houses are still owned by the boys, the straight, white, able-bodied boys. Until this week. This week, a powerful actress in Hollywood woke up and decided, this is a new day. And maybe some of you saw the Oscars last Sunday night. One of my favorite actresses, Frances McDormand. Toby and I love her from Fargo, if you remember her from Fargo. She was in Raising Arizona and all kind of great movies. Well, she won her second Academy Award Sunday night and gave this just powerful speech for her acceptance words. First, she asked all the female nominees to stand and be acknowledged. And as the women were standing, she said, "Look around. These are women who have stories to tell and projects to be financed." And then she left the podium, and the words she said right before she left were, "So ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you with 2 words this evening. Inclusion rider." The audience started clapping, but not very loud, because I think most people were looking at each other going, "What? What is an inclusion rider?" Well, America found out the next day, because, honey, that was all social media and all the news was talking about. What is an inclusion rider and what does it mean? Well, in short, an inclusion rider is a stipulation that actors and actresses can ask or demand that's added into their contracts that requires a certain level of diversity within the cast and crew of their film. Now, it's a relatively new idea. Even Frances McDormand didn't know about it until last week. Most people are reticent to engage legal remedies or apply contract leverage like this against the studios because, like me in the treehouse, they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to ruin their chances of getting in. Bottom line, the boys own the treehouse. The movie industry is a classic example of the proverbial treehouse with a sign that's hung out that says, "No, fill in the blank," with whatever demographic that's not straight, white, able-bodied male allowed. For example, a recent study analyzing 900 popular movies from the last 10 years showed that LGBT-identified characters represented 1% of the characters. 1. Similarly, the Asian community has for years endured the sting of Hollywood casting Caucasians for Asian actors and actresses. I mean, for example, DreamWorks and Paramount cast Scarlett Johansson, sorry, it's just funny, a Scandinavian actress, as a Japanese cyborg. In their adaptation of Ghost in the Shell a couple of years ago, the announcement coincided with reports that producers considered using digital tools to make Ms. Johansson look more Asian. Another overlooked population are those with disabilities. As comedian and disability advocate Maysoon Zaid explained, she said, "We, the disabled, are 20% of the population, and yet we are only 2% of the images that you see on American television. But what's worse is of those 2% of the images that we see, 95% are played by actors and actresses without disability." Of course, women aren't allowed in the treehouse either. According to another study of top-grossing 250 films, women comprised 11% of the directors, 11% of the writers, 16% of the editors, and 3% of the composers. And of course, the statistics for inclusion are equally, if not more skewed, for people of color. Again, in studies and statistics of recent popular movies in the last 10 years, 71% of the speaking roles went to white actors and actresses. 71%. Far outweighing the speaking roles for black actors, which was about 13%, and Hispanic being 3%. The movie industry is the classic example of the proverbial treehouse with the sign hung out front. And tragically, Hollywood is not an isolated example. It is simply a microcosm of a deep-seated, systemic prejudice and racism that runs through the social meridians of our country and our world. Achieving the American dream shouldn't be like trying to get in a treehouse where only certain people are welcome. The Puritan work ethic shouldn't just work for people who look like early white Puritans. Frances McDormand was right. We need an inclusion writer. But the one thing I wish she had changed about her language was instead of calling it a writer, I wish she had called it a clause. You know, a writer implies an afterthought, that it's just added on. But a clause is an inherent part, a core part of the contract. That's why I entitled the sermon, The Inclusion Clause, because it's so important it needs to be in the base covenant. We need an inclusion clause, not just for Hollywood, but for life. And brothers and sisters, we have one. It's called the Bible. And unlike most convoluted corporate documents, this contract boils down into two simple terms. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. That provision is put out specifically in Leviticus 19:18 and in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then in our scriptures today, you see that it is set forth in a general manner throughout the Bible. I know that was a lot of scriptures, but I just got excited. There were so many great ones. Sorry, Joe, Jed, read all that. But I mean, this idea, I love this. Unequal weights and unequal measures are an abomination to the Lord. I love the idea that you shall not do injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness not judge your neighbor. I mean, it goes on and on. These are just examples. The Bible says this crystal clear. And if you take these biblical words and apply them to the discrimination in our world, you get God saying to the straight white, able-bodied power structure something like this. Well, boys, I own this tree and the tree house that's in it. Technically, you're trespassing. But I'll let you stay only if you take that tacky sign off the door and let all my people in. If we've accepted God's terms, if we've accepted this contract, then we are bound to live within the parameters of that contract, which means we are bound to love our neighbors with equal measure and impartiality. So let's talk about a couple of quick examples of how we can do that. I'm going to give you three. One, use diversity for strength. Yesterday, a number of us, I mentioned, from the congregation, went to a film festival over at the Intrepid, and it included 2 feature movies about the lives and struggles of people with disabilities. One movie was about this hugely successful design firm in Barcelona that employs people with Down syndrome, with autism, with schizophrenia as artists and designers. When it was suggested to one of the owners that he was so compassionate in his business, he laughed and explained that he didn't see himself as kind. He said, no, I'm actually wily and smart, because his employees, his artists, think differently. They see the world with a lateral view, thus producing art and design that is unlike any of their competitors. Diversity brings creativity. It elevates our thinking. It makes us stronger. We can also, second thing we can do, take a moment and learn about others with whom we're not familiar. You know, come on, y'all, that's an easy one, seriously. I mean, just commit once a week to see or watch or read something different. I mean, how easy would it be just to sit down in your favorite comfy chair and click on Netflix and pick something different? Trust me, I know how hard that is. I go home, I'm tired, I scoot down the chair, I click on Netflix, and I'm like, that looks so interesting, I'm gonna watch West Wing for the 65th time. Bang. It's just comfortable and easy, but guess what? There's a lot to be learned out there. Watch something different, something that involves people or places or things with which we are not familiar, like the new Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, or Last Men in Aleppo, a wonderful movie about the war, a wonderful and tragic movie about the war in Syria. Or if you don't do Netflix, then read a book outside the genre you're otherwise accustomed to. Or join us for church events like yesterday where we watch these incredible movies. Empathy and understanding come from knowledge, and that knowledge is right at our fingertips. The last thing I want to mention of how we can live out this contract is this. Refuse to support people who don't live by the inclusion clause. Make it a deal breaker. And one way we can do that is to be intentional about how we spend our money. Much of the reason that the white power structure has been able to justify the outrageous hiring practices in Hollywood is money. One of the main arguments against inclusion of people of color, for example, is the claim, of course, films with diverse casts don't make money. Really? Yesterday, it was announced that Black Panther, the first mainstream superhero movie fronted by an almost entirely black cast, became only the 33rd movie in all history to cross the $1 billion mark. $1 billion. That's a lot of zeros. It joins movies like Jurassic Park and Harry Potter and Avatar, and you know what? It did it in only 26 days after its release. In your face, Hollywood. Brothers and sisters, we have more power than we think. We have the power to take care of each other, to give everyone a fair chance. We have the opportunity to take back the treehouse. To paraphrase the actress Gina Rodriguez, she said, you know, as soon as you follow your dreams, you give others the permission to follow theirs. For me, she says, I'm hoping young girls will say, well, Gina's like me. I mean, maybe not necessarily the same skin color, or maybe not necessarily the same background, but like, she's like me. I'm not alone. I can do this. Change is happening. And it's not a social fad or some kind of whim on Twitter. As Frances McDormand explained, she said, the whole idea of women trending, no. African Americans trending, no. That changes now. For each of us stands poised right now, today, ready to make that change. No more are we going to allow a straight, white, able-bodied, boys-only treehouse. No more are we going to allow the girls, are we going to allow the gifts and talents of all God's children to be wasted, we must climb the ladder and storm the treehouse. We must ensure that everyone is welcome and invited. We must live our lives according to the covenant, to the contract to which we agreed. We must live according to the inclusion clause of life. And the people said,
"Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Let not your heart be troubled. His tender word I hear, and resting on His goodness, I lose my doubt and fear. Though by the path He leadeth, but one step I may see. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. For His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me.
thanks for joining us. Madison Avenue Baptist Church is located at 31st and Madison Avenue in New York City. Our website is www.mabcnyc.org.
Just as I am without one plea, but that Thy blood was shed for me, and that Thou bids me come to Thee, O
Glad that you all came to be with us in worship today. If you're a visitor, please remember this is a community of faith in which you will always be welcome and you will always be family. And until we see you again, I ask God's blessings and peace on each and every one of you. And as we leave through those doors, let us leave committed to bringing all God's children to the banquet table. Let us leave committed to living a life with an inclusion clause. Amen.